You see, when a man bleeds, it's just tissue. No blood from one of you things won't obey when it's attacked. It'll try and survive.
Now, step into the incredible, amazing future as we go exploring tomorrow. And now, here is your guide to these adventures of the mind, the editor of astounding science fiction magazine, John Campbell Jr.
The essential character of any frontier you explore is that if you get into it and stick your neck out, you get it lopped off, and there's no help. The frontier is the place where there isn't any reserve, where there isn't anyone to help you if you get into trouble. There is no support. Tonight's story is a story of a true frontier. You know, sometimes the frontier lies just the other side of a doorway. It doesn't seem very different. It can be the difference between life and sudden death.
John W. Campbell became, in the 1930s, one of the most important editors in the history of science fiction literature. I mean, he was one of the writers and editors that helped push science fiction into a kind of adult level, and he wanted it to be scientifically believable and believable on an emotional level. One of the interesting things about Who Goes There was it sort of had its genesis in his childhood. His mother and his aunt were identical twins.
As a child, that confused him. You know, I mean, like, is that mama or isn't it? Which is a spooky idea. It's not something we ever particularly think of.
And so he was having to deal with this idea of someone who looks like someone you love and is extremely close to you, but isn't.
And that evolved over the years into his novella, Who Goes There, about this crew of scientists down at the South Pole who discover what apparently is a flying ship from generations ago with some sort of alien thing on it.
And they wind up thawing out this creature that's frozen in a block of ice. They've destroyed the ship accidentally while trying to break it out of the ice using a thermite bomb. And the creature is this object of incredible horror to them. It's described as having these 3 burning red eyes and these hair-like worms. It's about 6 feet tall, and it has this look of absolute rage on its face.
It's a shape-shifting thing. It takes the shape of anything around it. So they don't know who or what may be part of the thing now, but they realize that over the course of the story, this thing can replace anything, and ultimately it will replace every living thing on Earth.
We're accustomed to certain little signs, symbols, facial expressions, tones of voice that have meaning when a human being is communicating with a human being. But we have no system of signs and no code of communication with the alien. How could we tell what the alien was thinking?
It turns out not only is it telepathic and a shapeshifter, it's also a kind of colony being. It doesn't necessarily have to take one form. It can be multiple creatures. And gradually it starts to kill off and take the form of the team's dogs, of members of the team. And gradually, you know, they all start to become more and more paranoid.
The frankness of the language. The way that Campbell wrote this is like, holy smokes. And it really just kind of blasts through what you would consider censorship from that time period. Just its presentation is not at all that kind of, I think, formality that we were kind of used to in fantasy writing from that period, or that sense of innocence, if you will. I think the first line is something like, "It stinks in here."
And meanwhile, the setting of the story itself is a character in the story. This horrible, frozen, windswept, snow-covered landscape that is every bit as hostile towards them as the creature itself is always there in the background.
It is a science fiction story that probably gave birth to a whole genre of science fiction stories.
The story was originally published in 1938 in his own magazine, Astounding. It was published under the pseudonym Don Stewart, so he effectively sold it to himself. He sold it to his own magazine.
John Campbell's stuff was fairly popular within the pulp market, sci-fi categories in the 30s and the 40s. And sometime in 47, 48, when Howard Hawks was shooting in Germany, he was shooting I Was a Male War Bride. He happened across a pulp sci-fi magazine, Amazing Stories or something like that, which had the Campbell story in it. And he read it and he said, "This might make a good picture."
Howard Hawks was one of the greatest American filmmakers of Hollywood's golden age. He was very much an autocrat. He was very much an auteur of his films. He made a great film in virtually every genre. He made a great gangster film, Scarface, lots of great comedies like His Girl Friday and I Was a Male War Bride. He made great westerns, Red River.
He said, "Okay, now we've had these flying saucers in the newspapers and all of this kind of stuff. People are scared of the atom bomb and the Russians. It's time for this story."
All these things were going on during this era. What were we going to find, if you will, beyond the stars? So Rocket Ship XM and Destination Moon and all that was so much a theme of the films that were being made. But here comes the movie about something that's all from up there and it lands here. And the film was prepared by one of his favorite screenwriters, Charlie Lee Darrah, who had worked on His Gal Friday.
But he wasn't really a fantasist as such. What he brought to it that I think works extremely well is the comedy, is the banter.
One of the first things that Hawks did was throw out about 2/3 of Campbell's story. So what they did was essentially take the first third of the story. You establish the location, the pole, and in the case of The Thing, it's the North Pole. It was the South Pole in the book.
When we would think of Russia, certainly during that period, we think of the Russian front. We think of those images. We think of snow and ice and those soldiers and everything else. And suddenly we're being told that's the enemy. Where are they coming from? They're coming from the land of ice.
And this group of scientists who are there discovering this flying craft that has this thing on it. And then they bring it back and it's still alive. That's about as much as the Campbell stuff as there is.
Russell Harlan was part of the Hawks unit. He was going to shoot it. So it was very much prepared within Winchester Productions, which was Howard Hawks' middle name. And it was going to be under the framework. And of course, the theory was that Hawks himself was going to direct it.
Hawks had done something to anger the Directors Guild on his previous film. And at the same time, Chris Nyby, who had been editing not just for Hawks, but Raoul Walsh and a whole lot of other people for years, he wanted to graduate, take the next step. He wanted to direct.
He understood Hawks's rhythms. He understood the way he liked to shoot. So I think it was important to him that he actually not direct it, but give it to the hands of somebody that he trusted. Practically every single cast member had some connection or another to Hawks. Margaret Sheridan, who actually gets top billing, had been a Hawks leading lady. I believe she actually was intended to be in Red River.
Bob Cornthwaite, that plays Dr. Carrington, was later in Monkey Business. Ken Tobey had been in I Was a Male War Bride. Dewey Martin was in The Big Sky and Land of the Pharaohs later.
You've got this one very striking guy, John Dierkees is his name. Big, tall guy who looks like he'd be at home out in the range. And in fact, he did a lot of Westerns.
Paul Frees, who of course became one of the great voiceover actors of the 20th century. And Douglas Spencer, who's very, very funny as the reporter. Of course, the reporter is almost a carryover from the front page in His Girl Friday, you know, with Lederer and Hecht.
These people are absolutely, utterly isolated. They're at the top of the world. They're hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand miles from any sort of civilization. There's also a storm coming in, so there's no way to get in, no way to get out. And there's a monster that wants to kill them all and drink their blood. And that's a wonderful idea. Well, to capture that, Howard Hawks decided, well, we're not going to go to the North Pole, but where can we go? And what his researchers found was a place called Cut Bank in Montana, which was a huge flat area that the Air Force had commandeered as a base. So the entire company, the entire cast went up there. You know, it got delayed a couple of days because all the snow would come down every night, you know, and you'd have 6 inches or a foot or whatever. But then by 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, it would all blow away, and then you'd have all these just empty areas, which is, you know, where the planes came in. Here they are, you know, up in really nearly Arctic conditions, with, you know, this huge snowless, iceless expanse of runway, and then, you know, back farther than is useful, a whole bunch of snow on the mountains. And some little kid was hanging out there, some little local kid, just kind of watching them. And he said to one of them, "What you doing?" He said, "Go away, kid. We're making a movie." Yeah. Well, why are you doing it here? Because it's supposed to be snowy. It's supposed to be like the North Pole. It's supposed to be. Leave me. You're bothering me. Well, it doesn't snow here. Oh, sure, it snows all over the place. It snows like a foot every night. Yeah. Yeah, but it doesn't snow here. That's why the Air Force had chosen that, because every morning the wind comes in and blows all the snow away. Anyway, oh, for Christ's sake. So after several months of getting absolutely nothing in Montana, Howard Hawks says, "All right, well, let's go back to Hollywood and take care of this." And they shot everything back in Hollywood at the RKO stages, but the exterior, so like the shots out where they find the saucer and blow it up and so on. That was done out of the RKO Ranch. That's in Encino. They had a sky there that was probably 70 feet tall. That's what they used in the thing. In the Campbell original, the original image of the creature that you see kind of vaguely through this ice is covered with kind of purplish tentacles, like, you know, like 1,000 worms that are all frozen, luckily. And early on, the Hawks and Charlie Lederer, who wrote the script, didn't really know what they were going to do. That was a way to go.
Is it human or inhuman? Earthly or unearthly?
They couldn't figure out exactly what he should look like. You know, they were on their own. Nobody had ever done this before. So Howard Hawks deferred to Lee Greenway, who was a terrific makeup artist.
You've got to think of his conception. It's a vegetable man, and you know, you read a script with nothing to bring to it other than maybe the original story. You know, you getting hold of what this thing should look like is very difficult. So I know that Lee Greenway, he drove out, I guess, to Howard Hawks' house with a new sculpture every couple of weeks, and some of the early ones just look like, you know, a pumpkin head or a vegetable man or whatever.
During this time, Howard Hughes, who owned RKO, sent Howard Hawks a memo of concern saying, "This new picture you're doing, I don't know that I'm enthusiastic about an old-fashioned, horror picture. And Hawks sent back a rather thoughtful, friendly letter to Howard Hughes, saying, Howard, this is completely new. It's just cutting-edge aeronautics here, and we've worked in the Russians, and the early warning system at the pole. Everything's going to be absolutely up to date. This is going to be a shocker, with torn out of the front pages, and the monster in it, the heavy, is going to be terrific. It's going to be absolutely unworldly. So, flip ahead a couple of weeks to Lee Greenway, showing yet another variation on what this thing is supposed to look like. And Howard Hawks comes in, looks at it, and just shrugs. He said, "Make him look like Frankenstein," and walked out.
That thing's alive, sir. I saw it. I shot at it. I hit it. I know it. Nothing happened. It just kept coming at me, making a noise like a cat mewing. Captain, it was awful. If you could have seen those hands and those eyes. Captain, you've got to do something about it. You've got...
It gave an identity, interestingly, to a story about lack of identity, a story about identity constantly changing. They decided to focus on an enemy.
It's just a straightforward, man-like creature who is apparently here to pave the way for an invasion of characters like him, all of whom want to drink our blood. That's actually a lot simpler and a lot more direct.
James Arness was a young contract player at RKO, really made an incredible impression in John Ford's Wagon Master as just the most murderous, vile member of that inbred family. And I think, quite honestly, I've always thought that performance led to the casting in The Thing. He was already there at RKO. He was physically very large.
And one of the best things about his contribution is the hands. The hand has that wonderful scene, and of course Lee Greenway sculpted those too.
If the creature in The Thing seems conventional now, you got to understand this was 1951. They were inventing science fiction as a genre. Until Destination Moon and Rocket Ship XM and Day the Earth Stood Still and The Thing, there was almost nothing in America of what we consider modern science fiction cinema. They're inventing it as they go along.
The lovely thing is that they don't show the monster. We have photographs now that were nowhere around when I was a kid. I mean, that you just did not see that. And that was intentional and works wonderfully.
It's a containment movie. I mean, that's the thing. And people seem to think, because Howard Hawks, we think of cattle drives, they think of Westerns. And the thing was, Howard Hawks was a director who did a lot of movies that took place entirely indoors.
People that worked on the film gave various accounts. Some said Hawks was the overriding influence. Some said he would rehearse the actors and maybe would shoot. I mean, there's different people that worked on it said different things. There is an overwhelming feeling of this being a Howard Hawks film, though.
There are no close-ups in the entire movie. Well, I take it back. There is one single close-up, and that you can't see. That's the close-up of the monster's head in the ice. It's a big block of ice with a thing laying there, and you can't see a thing. All you can see is this vague outline of this head. And that was intentional, because Chris Nyby, as an editor, knew how you could reform a film. You could change, a minor character into a major character. You could change that good guy into a bad guy. You could eliminate a character entirely. You could speed up a film, slow it down, all if you had the coverage. And his thought was, why don't we just shoot it so there is no other way other than the one we're doing? And Hawks said, yeah, fine.
I think probably my very, very favorite thing in the movie is where they're going down the corridor after the monster, and they look in the lab, or well, no, it's not in there, but that's radioactive, something else, that's the point. And it's really like a downbeat moment, and only a great director can get away with this. you're thinking there's going to be something more and something more and something more, and then they might find the monster, and they open the door, and it's right there. And actually, if you look at that carefully, there's a little dolly in the camera to help reveal that moment, but it doesn't tip off that it's coming.
Gentlemen, do you realize what we've found? A being from another world, as different from us as one pole from the other. If we can only communicate with it.
In the Campbell novella, it's a scientific installation. And interestingly, in the Hawks version, it's a more of a military installation. The real heroes of the film, of the Hawks version, it's the military. And the scientists are sort of considered suspect, especially Carrington. Carrington is looked upon with a kind of distrust, you know, that as scientists were the people that created the atomic bomb. Scientists are the ones that are creating all these hellish new hazards in the modern age.
You have the military going, look, this is an invader that has to be eliminated because they're here to eliminate us. And the scientific community is going, no, this is something foreign that we can learn from and therefore needs to be preserved. And these things just keep colliding.
One of the interesting things to me is how sort of Russian Carrington's character looks. He's got the big furry hat and he has the kind of Lenin beard and everything. And he's so icy, as I think Americans would have, you know, perhaps thought Russians were at the time.
Of course, the scientist ends up being misguided because he steals blood to feed the plants, and Bob Cornthwaite goes to this creature and says, oh, please let me communicate with you and everything else. And he gets a busted collarbone and you know, a fractured face and everything else because he, you know, get out of the way, Poindexter. That's really the reaction. So that gives Ken Tobey the right to pick up a machine gun, and they start firing, and then of course electricity. But that conflict, I think, is the way that they then express the other themes that are in the short story.
There's also that closing line, you know, keep watching the skies. You know, this is, I think, endemic of that kind of Cold War paranoia that's hard for, I think, modern audiences to understand. The Thing from Another World was one of the first hit science fiction movies of the 50s. You have to understand that selling a science fiction movie to a studio in the 1950s was very, very difficult. They had very little faith in them. They thought they were silly. They thought it should be, you know, Flash Gordon with a rocket with a sparkler flying behind it.
You even look at the trailer for The Thing. It's very revealing because they're telling you Howard Hawks of Big Sleep and Howard Hawks of this and that. So just so you know all the big credits, so they can say this is his new film. They're kind of slipping it in because they're not really sure that an alien film is going to be big box office.
And there was a lot of publicity, kind of this vague, oblique stuff. What is the thing? Who is the thing, and so forth, where you didn't really tell what was going on. You know, doctors fear the thing, children are killed by the thing. You know, they were all over the place. It was a neat teaser idea.
It plugged into, if you will, this feeling, not only enthusiasm for space exploration and rocket travel, all these things that were brand new, but also the idea of the paranoia of the Red Menace and the paranoia that came automatically with the atomic bomb.
Just before the movie came out, there was a Phil Harris novelty song called The Thing. And Phil Harris was this bumptious, down-home singer, band leader. And this was a funny novelty song. But it became a big hit. Well, okay, now we've got this major picture. We've spent $1 million plus on it, and people are going to think it's this Phil Harris song, which is why they call it The Thing from Another World under there. Because if you see, look at the main title, even the main title on the trailer, which is something else, clearly adding From Another World on there was all after the fact.
The fact that it was bankable, the fact that it was a hit, and the fact that you could make a very, very frightening science fiction horror movie helped pave the way for, I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of other, sometimes sometimes good, sometimes awful, alien invasion movies in the 50s, and there were a slew of them. My friend was a big admirer of the film The Thing, and he got to talking to Campbell about it, and Campbell said, "What do you think of the movie?" And he said, "I think it's a really outstanding film." And Campbell said, "Well, I'm not a judge of movies, really. It could be a very good movie, but it's not my story." And Campbell was deeply disappointed that they dropped the shapeshifter aspect of the story, the telepathy aspect of the story, in favor of going for a much more straightforward monster, this vegetable creature.
My exposure to the short story Who Goes There, I was recovering from an operation at the age of 12, and my late brother gave it to me in a collection of short stories entitled Adventures of Time and Space. This all stayed with me as I began developing an education in movies while watching them, wanted to make them, and landed in 1969 at USC Cinema Department, where I met John Carpenter. This is probably one of the first times we talked about the movie at length. I think John was a bigger fan of it than I was.
John Carpenter said he was absolutely terrified of it as a child, as I'm sure a lot of people were.
And I said, "Well, yeah, but have you read the short story?" And John said, "Oh, yeah, it's really good." And Dan O'Bannon, who was also there, said, yeah, it's terrific. I mean, it's, nobody's, done anything about it, Didn't take it any further than that. It was just, the fact that John was aware of it. And John was one of the few people, along with Dan at USC, that had an education in science fiction. Literature science fiction, had been reading as I had for years and years.
You think about how few people went along the path that John Carpenter did. In 1970, a short film that he worked on, The Resurrection of Bronco Billy, was awarded an Academy Award. His student film was expanded for a theatrical release in 1975. That was Dark Star.
Carpenter has said that Hawks was his favorite director, and there's an obvious enormous influence of Hawks on his first film after Dark Star. And Assault on Precinct 13 is almost like a modern urban inner city version of Hawks' Rio Bravo.
Precinct 13, cut off, isolated in the middle of a city, as a human wave of street killers turns the night into a nightmare.
So sometime around the middle of 1977, I met producer David Foster, and I took him my only copy of the short story. And I sat down with him and I said, "Listen, I have an idea for a thinking man's monster movie." He said, "Well, I think we can do something with this." And at that point, Universal bought the rights to the short story in perpetuity for us to produce.
To cover all the bases, Universal also acquired the remake rights to the original film and title from Wilbur Stark, who would eventually get an executive producer credit on the film. Stark owned the remake rights for the bulk of the RKO film library.
Almost immediately, the studio had a suggestion for us. They had recently signed Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel, based on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they suggested Tobe and Kim for the project.
His script with Kim Henkel didn't feature the trust angle that we got in Campbell's story Who Goes There, and the producers were looking more to incorporate that original story, and so they parted ways with Tobe Hooper.
Cohen wanted Carpenter to direct the film from the beginning, but Universal was reluctant to let such an inexperienced director take the project. Of course, a few years later, he went on to revolutionize horror filmmaking with Halloween.
Halloween night. A small American town. 15 years ago.
But the impetus to make a Thing remake, I believe, really came about in 1978 because a remake of another 1950s film, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, starring Donald Sutherland and Leonard Nimoy, directed by Philip Kaufman, was very successful. It won critical accolades.
But in the back of my mind, I knew there was going to be an event happening that might change the equation considerably. And that event was the release of Alien on May 25th, 1979.
Well, science fiction had kind of lain dormant. The studios weren't pouring a lot of money into them. Star Wars and Alien proved to be major game changers in terms of bringing back the genre of both science fiction, horror, and fantasy.
On Monday morning, May 28th, I walked into David Foster's office at Universal. He had Variety open, and the grosses, which were stellar for the film that weekend. And I just asked David a question. I said, do you think they'll understand now? And David said, yeah, I'm sure they will. And Tannen said, yeah, go ahead, sign John, we'll back it.
He was truly the choice for the movie because I don't think anyone else had that just astounding passion for the film, and certainly the passion he had and continues to have for Howard Hawks.
If you go back and watch Halloween, you'll see that the film Howard Hawks' The Thing is there. It's on the TV screen for the horror movie matinee, that they're watching all night while Michael Myers is killing people. So he clearly loved the film, but he wasn't interested in redoing what somebody else had done.
He saw it as an iconic piece, but he also was a huge fan of the original short story and understood the psychological aspects that had not been exploited, which were far deeper than the original Hawks version.
I'd seen The Bad News Bears the year before. I was really, really impressed with particularly its screenplay by Bill Lancaster. I just thought it a model of construction and very human. And, I thought it was just a terrific script, even a better script than the movie that was made from it. I really wanted Bill in for this project and suggested him to John. And it was a mind meld. It was really the perfect blend of idea, of personality. John, this is the first time I'd seen John comfortable with another writer in the room.
When Carpenter approached his version of The Thing, the influence of Hawks was going to be the tension of isolation, the tension of everything getting smaller and smaller and smaller, the group getting smaller and smaller, and that they were constantly under attack, constantly under siege in this limited space.
And he began talking about developing levels of paranoia and trust issues between the men, so severe that you were never really sure there was a monster or not. I could see John listening to this, responding, and my own interpretation was, okay, you supply the structure and I'll supply the monster. And on that sort of basis, a relationship was formed,
By going back to that original novella, it is so reflective of what the final movie is. It really is that novella in so many ways, right off the pages onto the screen.
A lot of the characters have the same names, Copper, McCready, and the basic idea of the shapeshifter remained. The blood test, the basic, the storyline, the basic crux of it, it's all there.
The idea that Blair was really it, and that Blair was, the character was taken over early, and the motivation of the monster itself, which is basically a clever creature that finds out what it can about the humans that it's assimilating, makes some choices about who to assimilate because it's costly and difficult to do, but realizes the best way to deal with the situation is to get them in fighting among themselves and absent itself from the scene.
One of the things that carries over from The Thing from Another World into the Carpenter version is the humor, is the banter between the men in the team, the scientific team. That's a very, very Hawksian kind of element, and the wisecracks, the funny lines, that there is a humor that runs through it, in spite of the fact that Carpenter's The Thing could have been an overwhelmingly bleak, overwhelmingly grim, overwhelmingly ugly movie.
David Foster asked me to put pressure on Bill, who was running late with it. There was actually the original hope that we could get the film ready for summer of 1981 if they were to approve it. A couple of things intervened with that. One was John's possible commitment on Escape from New York, and the other, the bill, wasn't close to being finished. And either the script was, as John said when he read it, it's one of the finest scripts I've ever read. And that was my feeling. And David said, They're going to be crazy if they don't want to make this. And if they don't want to make it, we'll take it somewhere else. A new contract was drawn up for John at that point, and among other things, contractually, he had the right to hire, and these were written into the contract, Larry Franco, Dean Cundy, and Todd Ramsey, and had the right of first refusal as its composer, as the film's composer.
Dean Cundy and John Carpenter were regular collaborators on a number of films. They worked together on Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York. And I think it's pretty clear from looking at those films that they have a symbiotic working relationship, that Carpenter's vision dovetails incredibly with Dean Cundy's camera work, and that when we think of those films, that's sort of the focal point of the Carpenter look in cinema.
My work had been always sort of little independent films, so to be working on a major lot, to have the facilities that a major studio has as far as stages and the budget to make really interesting sets and backgrounds and environments, to me, was just an amazing opportunity.
John originally came to the project thinking that he would probably want to use Joe Alves, who of course was his designer on Escape from New York. The production department at the studio thought that Alves was a very expensive hire in terms of the money that he spent, and were not fans. John Lloyd was the suggestion of the production department, and we had known his work, and it was a really good one.
John Lloyd, God bless him, was my first experience really with a old school, hardcore art department, grinded out, creative, like genius guy.
And John really had the knack for creating a believable interiors. Looked like someplace that people lived. A lot that, of course, his art department, his art director Henry Larec, and his set decorators had a lot to do with that.
His designs were always interesting. They were always shootable. He understood the camera, and what it needed to make an interesting shot.
We knew immediately that we were not going to try and do something on the stage as an exterior, because at most of the time, and nowadays you can do it a little bit better, but in those days it always looked terrible. So we never ever considered doing anything exterior on a stage. So anything that happened outside, we were going to do outside. The biggest challenge was, okay, where are we going to build the exterior of this camp in a place that we can access? I don't know how we ended up where we ended up exactly, but I do remember we took a lot of planes, trains, and automobiles to scout different locations, and most of it came from the Film Commission, from the British Columbia Film Commission.
I had been talking to people in Canada, and they had told me that Stewart, British Columbia, had a glacier we could drive up on. And the interesting thing is, you have to drive into the United States and then back into Canada again to get to this glacier. You go from Stewart to Hyder, Alaska, and then up an ice road, basically, a mountain ice road, to back into Canada, and that puts you on top of the glacier.
It was intended that we would build the set in the summer and let it be snowed in, and it was going to have to be designed and built like a real practical structure. First of all, because of the amount of snowfall that would hit it in terms of the roof, and also we wanted it to be able to provide shelter for the crew in case it couldn't get back down off the mountain. John began originally, he said this in interviews, and he certainly said it to us. He said, "What I don't want is a man in a suit." John said, "Look, even Alien, Alien ended up being a man in a suit. I don't want a man in a suit."
We now have the special effects technology to do the monster in the way it was in the story, as this kind of shape-changing monster. We can do the issue of trust, who's a man, who's a thing. We don't have to do a monster carrot like we did in the 1950s.
Early on, we began discussing ideas and people to do them. Even Geiger's name came up, but Geiger was just too distinctive. David Foster and Larry Terman had produced a film called Caveman, and had worked with its monster designer, a gentleman named Dale Kuipers, who actually designed many of the creatures. His basic design was modeled after what Bill Lancaster had originally written in the script. John was never that comfortable with the design. I remember him looking at this painting thinking, how the am I gonna shoot this and make it look realistic? We were right in the middle of prep. We had 8 weeks to go before filming. We needed to move immediately on to someone else. There was really one obvious choice, and he'd been lingering in the background for a year or so, and that was Rob Bottin.
John Carpenter and Rob Bottin had worked together previously on The Fog. In fact, Rob Bottin played the villain of The Fog in some scenes. He was Captain Blake, the pirate, leper, ghost character in that film. But understand that the work that was done on The Fog, amazing, of course, but not on the scale of The Thing.
He was very, very nervous. And he was very young. He was probably one of the youngest people on the picture. I thought he was scared to death he was going to screw up, but he had to, of course, convince all of us that he had it all under control.
The title of the movie is The Thing. So obviously, you know, the audience is going to be expecting, we were expecting, and it was really up to Rob to kind of deliver some really spectacular stuff.
And Rob wanted to go in a different direction. And what Rob eventually came up with, as we saw, was a monster that deconstructed.
Rob would be working with Mike Plug and Mentor Ubner, coming up with these design concepts. And after we kind of had approval on the designs, we would meet in the conference room with Dave Kelsey, Rob, and myself, and kind of figure out how we were going to approach achieving these effects.
Rob's idea was that the monster would always be changing, that there would be no final form. And John liked the idea that what we were getting at were things that he had not seen before on screen.
John bought into it, and I actually talked to John later on, and he said, yeah, no, Rob, his imagination was amazing. I think for, you know, a guy that's 21, 22 years old, to have that kind of an imagination and that kind of opportunity, it's like the gift of a lifetime.
The opening sequence with the dog, we were living in a glacier research camp about half an hour by helicopter from the nearest city.
We could only have 12 people in the geological camp that were going to stay there a week to be able to shoot this. And so everybody had to do each other's job.
Larry Franco, the assistant director, was the guy in the helicopter shooting at the dog. The shot where the Norwegians are digging out, I'm the guy in the hole planting the explosives. That was done on the Juneau ice field.
They did a fantastic job of shooting it and playing it just perfectly, how to play that dog right. I always had the shots I needed to underline that, the dogs.
We had to do some tie-in shots with, you know, on the way to the saucer with when Norris, Palmer, and McCready go to discover it and land, and we had stand-ins up there. Two of us played Palmer and Norris and had already outfitted them because we'd cast them, but we didn't have Kurt, or hadn't signed Kurt. So John picked the outfit before he went up, and it was including the hat, the famous hat that Kurt Russell hated so much. And it is John Carpenter who wears that outfit for the first time in this movie.
We were out in, you know, the rocks and the mountains and the snowfields. So all of the locations are very authentic and huge in scope.
It was difficult on location, so we wanted to do as much on stage as we could. One of the things, though, that I had a question about was the interior of the Norwegian camp, which is wrecked in the movie. We were trying to decide whether we did that on location or whether we would do that on stage. The difficulty with doing it on stage is John wanted to be able to see people's breath to make it look like they're cold.
What are you doing, Doc?
Could be important work. I want to take it back with us.
Well, it's getting late. Let's hurry it up.
So the Norwegian camp, and then also the ending, the basement of the outpost. Those were built on stages at Universal, but we refrigerated the stages.
We were able to get the temperature down to about 44 degrees. And then we ran humidifying misters up in what they call the permanents of the stage. Those are the rafters. And in using those, we got the humidity up to about 80%. And under those conditions, if you backlit them, you can see the actor's breath.
First day up, first thing from Rob's shop at the Norwegian camp was the frozen figure. And again, it didn't move, but it was frozen, and it needed to look right.
Mac!
In the film, McCready always calls it the Swedish camp, and Swedes So we nicknamed our guy the Swede. And it was made from a mold of our head mold maker, Gunnar Ferdinandsen. They had taken a life cast of him in a grimacing pose with his mouth open. When they went to remove the life cast, the dental impression material had poured down his throat, and they pulled out this long trail. And I think they did a little Heimlich movement to get out the last remaining alginate.
Point was, John didn't think it looked real, and was worried about it looking real. Immediate concern, first day. And with Dean finagling it, I think it looks fine, ended up looking fine, but John was really concerned.
The thing I remember a lot about that was that it was in the dead of summer. It was 100 degrees out, or 95 at least, so if you wanted to go out the stage, it was like murder to get all your clothes off and be able to, and then put everything back on, because you had to walk by the exhaust fans and all that.
I was wondering when El Capitan was going to get a chance to use his pop gun.
The sets that we walked onto at the beginning of the day were very impressive and very atmospheric. They gave us the right feel. So the creativity of people like John Lloyd gave us as actors a strong sense of place.
I know how this one ends.
We actually had computer effects on the movie, which was, I had brought in my Apple II with the game Sargon, the chess game Sargon, which I personally owned. And that's the game that Kurt's playing in the scene where he's playing chess on the computer, which was supposed to be so futuristic,
Rook to knight 6. Checkmate. Checkmate.
Cheating bitch. And the other portion of it was in Stewart, British Columbia, which was that was a fascinating experience too. We ended up on a road that led to a copper mine that was a real operating copper mine. And we built this little spur off the road, and then we were down right next to a glacier. We were on solid ground. We weren't on the glacier itself, but we were right close to it.
We would have to bus every morning for about 45 minutes or so up this little narrow dirt road that led from this very Wild West town of Stewart all the way up to what was really the mine, the purpose of the town.
And they had road markers all the way up the hill, mile 1, mile 2, mile 3, and mile 4. And they had the trucks that were loaded with ore were coming down the mountain. They had right of way, no matter what, because they're doing like 30 or 40 miles an hour, which is really fast of a, how many ton truck down this sort of road like that. And so we and then we had it all set up with the universal drivers and this and that. So we're in the van, and so we're in the van in the morning, dark 30 or something. Universal 1 north at 2, okay. Then you'd hear K55 south at 4. Now you're thinking to yourself, okay, so we're at mile 2, he's at 4. So somewhere near mile 3, we have to get off the road. You know what I mean?
When we got to Alaska to film, oh my God, this is the same room that I left on the soundstage. Exactly. I mean, that I had really never experienced. And I thought, I just cannot believe, I was so geeked.
Radio's gone.
So are the choppers.
Yeah, we're completely cut off. All we can do now is hole up till spring, wait for the rescue team.
I remember the first day on location out there, we all had Army issue, Universal issue jackets on with these big hoods in the front. Nobody knew who anybody was. So you'd have to go around and talk to the guy in front of him to find it. So next, and within 2 hours, everybody had their name taped on the back of their thing, and we were all, it was freezing cold. We were all cold all the time, and we were having trouble with the equipment because it was so cold, and the lens were fogging up.
We're shooting outside with the camera, and then the camera assistants would take it inside one of the buildings to work on it. The heat and humidity in the buildings would fog up all of the lenses on the inside and stuff. So they had to take the doors and windows off of the camera room, and it had to stay the, very, very cold temperatures of the outside, so that the cameras, we never had any issues with the cameras.
There were times when we just had to kill time because they couldn't let us go away, because away was an hour and a half bus ride through the snow and back. So we pretty much had to stay where we were, even if we weren't on camera.
And I really think that the fact that the entire cast lived together in this rather remote town really gave them sort of an understanding of what the lifestyle of an Antarctic outpost was like.
Put that down. No, I'll put this right through your head. You guys gonna listen to Gary? You gonna let him give the orders? I mean, he could be one of those things.
We built that because we were going to live in it, basically. So it wasn't a movie set. It was built for Stout, and so the work that went into actually scoring it, the hours that were put into chainsawing the inside of it and making sure it doesn't crumble, and the gas that was poured in there, the whole thing was just an amazing thing. And the cameras were up on this slope, and I was down on the bottom with the radio, and I was hiding behind this fucking Caterpillar blade, and people were running around, and just the thrill for me of being the guy that's going to say, okay, we're doing it, was like, it was like, okay, we're going to war, let's go! And then when it went, everybody's like, yeah, it was like, Jesus, this is awesome. And then, so we all started to wander back in like, oh, look at us. And then, boom, this gas bomb goes off that didn't go off when it was supposed to. It scared the shit out of everybody. Everybody was running. It was fantastic. We were freezing cold. We were sweating and freezing, and it's joyful.
This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to, but it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies.
Well, when you, of course, shoot your entire film, and with the actors and whatever, except the sequences with the effects, you're going to need to match. And of course, you need the sets, and you need everything you can from the original film. And we shot the effects in what's called, I think it still is, it's the Heartland Studios in North Hollywood, which really is not that far from the Universal lot.
One of the greatest gifts that was given to Rob Bottin and our group there was that they were allowed to have the freedom to do and try and dream and imagine more than probably most places that they could have ever worked.
I think the dog kennel sequence was one of the more challenging because there were a whole variety of creatures that Rob had constructed, each one designed to do something in particular. The first one that happens where the dog head splits open, surprising us completely. That was our first look at the kind of stuff we were going to be doing.
And that was a kind of a difficult effect to achieve. It was actually the last shot that we filmed in the movie. It was cut into 4 pieces and had spring steel applied to it to have it in that pillback position. And piano wire was threaded through these little eyelets and closing the thing back up and putting it together.
It's one of those things that when an audience sees it for the first time, it's like there's no going back. It's like, oh my gosh, we're into something really strange here.
So at one point, we were getting a bit overloaded. Rob felt that it might be good if we could get someone else to pick up one of the effects in the dog kennel sequence. So he had talked to Stan about doing this one dog. We kind of dressed it on the elevated set, adding components from our previous effects with the dog head skinned back with the tongue wagging, and then in a reverse action shot we added the tentacles coming out.
They could have them stretched out and then let them snap back into the monster, but when you get the sequence right, it looks like these tentacles are emerging from the monster's body and reaching out to other creatures and snagging them.
It starts with the dog, it started with the huge dogs, but there were all sorts of other puppet things that were used. There was even a sleeve, a latex sleeve that went over somebody's hand as it metamorphosed into other things, but carefully storyboarded out and planned before they were shot.
I got to man the flamethrower, and the trigger on that thing was like a hair. It was like a hair trigger. I mean, you tap that thing, and it would start to spit gas, and the flame would go, and it's like, I believe some of the other guys they wanted to, use that flamethrower too. But I was like, I was both excited and nervous because one stupid accident could cause irreparable damage.
How long were you alone with that dog?
I don't know, an hour and a half maybe. What the hell are you looking at me like that for?
I don't know.
The next thing we did was the Norris chest ripping open and Dr. Cooper's arms going in and getting severed. We achieved that by having Charlie Callahan in a position where his heart is in under the table and his head and arms are exposed. On top of that was a mechanism with the shark-like teeth that would open and close.
To mechanize that, we needed some power. It couldn't just be monofilament pulling on these things, so we had hydraulic rams in there to actually use that force and to actually cut these arms and armatures off.
For the arm severing, took impressions of Richard Dysart's arms and fabricated gelatin arms, which I then cut open and created layers of muscle and bone and rigged them with tubing for bleeding and pre-scored the area that they were going to rip in.
We're left with a shot of Mr. Dysart with stumps spewing blood, right? Okay, you think, okay, that's an elaborate scene, right? Oh, no, we're not done.
So for the next part of the sequence, the Norris head stretches off. We had seen the storyboards of the stretching, and we're trying to figure a way to achieve that stretching and the gurgling and popping.
And once again, we have a pneumatic ram in there pushing that head off. And we have, as it goes over the edge, we have a person's hand in there moving the mouth around. Tongue shoots out, wraps around the leg of the chair, and pulls itself. Actually, we were pulling it, and we had a little blade in the floor, because the floor is raised, a little blade hooked to the head, pulling it across the linoleum floor.
It comes to its last moment, which is the severed head of a human being sprouting huge spider legs and walking out of the room upside down.
And this is where a radio-controlled head comes in, and the legs start dancing and walking, and that's all accomplished with radio-controlled servos and electric motors that are run off of batteries.
Bill Lancaster came up with a line for one of the characters that expressed the kind of shock and wonder that the audience was feeling. I guess they gave the line to the right character because they made it Palmer.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
One of the most frightening aspects of the Hawks version and the Carpenter version is the utter disregard for human life that the creatures have. It's basically like they are like cattle, they're like animals.
It was this idea of the flesh being subverted. And this was a very powerful idea in the 80s. You think about the 80s, you think about Olivia Newton-John and singing, you know, Let's Get Physical or Totally High. You think about films like Jamie Lee Curtis and John Travolta in Perfect, where it's like everybody has to be perfect and beautiful, right? Well, what do we have in The Thing? We have like this thing that comes through, and it's like it rips you apart, and it shows you sort of the frailty of the flesh and how susceptible we are to being subverted from within.
We went and saw a rough cut of that over at the lot at the Alfred Hitchcock Theater. After coming out of that, I kind of looked at Vince Prentice and Art Pimentel and said, I don't know how anybody's gonna ever beat that. I go, that was amazing. It kind of changed things up to realize that we are doing something really special here.
He ain't tying me up.
Then I'll have to kill you, child.
Then kill me.
Another special effects sequence that people talk about, and many people consider it the suspenseful highlight of the film, and I totally agree, is the blood test scene. Now, in this scene, they've determined that human blood and thing blood, they are different, that the thing blood, each, I guess, cell is alive, and it'll do anything to survive, so if you sort of stimulate or attack the blood cells, it'll run away, okay?
We're gonna find out who's the thing. Watching Norris in there gave me the idea that maybe every part of him was a whole. Every little piece was an individual animal with a built-in desire to protect its own life.
They cut everybody's fingers, they drip it into these little Petri dishes, right? And then they get a hot copper wire, fire it up with a flamethrower, and they test everybody's blood, one after the other after the other.
So you're not expecting that when McCready sticks the hot wire into the Petri dish with Palmer's blood in it, you're not expecting anything to happen. It's going to sizzle, and then he'll test somebody else's blood.
The effect is a fiberglass hand with a Petri dish, and it has a bladder that comes out like this angry blood drop, which is a really cool sculpture that Willie Witten did.
And then made him the most, I would say, the most shocking transformation of the movie from human to monster.
Palmer character drops down to the floor, and his head splits open, revealing these teeth, and a tongue comes out. I believe that tongue coming out was a gravity shot. We shot upwards on it, and gravity brought the tongue out. And then we close up of windows with the tongue wrapping around his neck, which was a reverse action shot. Then we have a Windows dummy that goes into the jaws. I was holding that, and they kind of held on that longer than I thought they would, so you can actually see the bottom of the dummy, where the dummy ends in a freeze frame.
They did a Blair monster, which must have been 50 feet high. Really interesting.
Blair head, jaws on the side, dog busting out of the chest. So we had to kind of work really closely and figure out proportions, how to create a sculpting armature that would be able to take apart, to pull off arms, and how that's going to be reassembled.
What's left of that sequence is some tentacles that rise out of the floor and grab the dynamite charger and pull it in. The sequence where it rises out of the floor that was intended to be stop motion apparently just didn't work right.
Part of that Blair monster sequence was animation that Randy Cook had done, and he had worked for months on doing this whole sequence, busting out of the floorboards and the dog coming out. I personally feel that part of the problem is why they didn't use all that sequence, that we had to make our creature much larger than its original animation puppet, and it was probably didn't cut together as well as we originally thought it would be. Much of the work that we did on the thing had never been done before. It required a lot of experimentation and quick fixes. It required that we would spend days on end at Universal Heartland. Many of the crew would be laid out in the conference room, the only room that had carpet, to grab a quick cat nap. We were a young crew. Most of us were in our 20s, some were in their teens. And we just went the extra mile to create this effects that are now a milestone in special makeup effects.
The saucer model is an interesting story by itself. It was built by an extremely talented woman model maker named Susan Turner.
It was shot with a motion control camera. Jim Danforth did the matte painting of Earth. I did the animation on the spaceship exhaust, and Pete did a masterful job of combining everything on the optical printer. And there could not have been a better opening for this film. It is classy, classic, and recalls the vintage aspects of the 1951 Hawks film and the original 1938 novella, Who Goes There?
Oddly enough, those shots were one of the few shots that we shot on the back lot at Universal Studios. We whited out a big section of the grass on the back lot and put the actors in their heavy weather gear on that white background. I had developed a technique, a sort of BIPAC technique for lifting color silhouettes off of a white background. So we used that to put the exploring team into a beautiful painting of the saucer. So the shots where you see the tiny figures against that background were all shot on oddly enough, on the Universal backlot. So Carpenter wound up with a couple of backlot shots in spite of himself.
John Carpenter was the son of a music professor who taught at Bowling Green University in Kentucky. And I think that John became a composer out of budgetary necessity, where he was probably the cheapest person that he could afford.
If you've seen interviews with John, he refers to his music as either as wallpaper or carpet. It's just supposed to be there. It's not supposed to get in the way of the movie, but give a mood or a feeling to the scene that reinforces what he wants in that scene. Because remember, he's the director. Often he wrote the film himself, so he's got a vision.
But with The Thing, which is his first major studio film, he actually gets a real budget this time. And, Carpenter, who's an admirer of Westerns, particularly Sergio Leone Westerns, and I can only imagine how many films that Morricone has scored that he's loved. Now he finally has the chance to hire a composer with the orchestral chops that, he may not have.
They screen the movie. Ennio makes his notes from whatever translation. He goes back and he scores the movie. Well, that score is in the film, but it wasn't quite what John wanted.
So he came back to Morricone, and he didn't speak Italian, and Morricone, I don't think, barely spoke any English, through an interpreter. And he played him, the score he'd done for Escape from New York. And basically said, this is kind of more what I'm looking for. So Morricone went back, not to the drawing board, but to do additional cues. And he hired a synthesist and essentially did his version of a John Carpenter score.
Then John comes at the very end of The Thing, post-production. He's gone through his editing, he's gone through the score, and kind of gave me a call and said, hey, I need a couple of things from you, can I come over? And in one afternoon, John sat down, I had the studio, all the equipment, and we created, I'll say 5 or 6 cues that are in the movie that if they're sort of tone clusters, they resemble the music that you hear later that we did in Christine.
A new one sheet arrived on our desks. We had been used to being consulted in terms of the advertising and publicity. This happened without our knowledge, and it was the now famous Struzan poster. John commented that he began this project by not trying to make a monster that featured a man in a suit. And what do we end up with on the one sheet? A man in a suit.
When I saw the one sheet, I really sort of felt, underwhelmed, because it didn't have anything that told you about the, fantastic adventure you were going to go on.
This was presented to us as a fait accompli. This is it. And John and I both thought it was a concession to B-movie status. The one sheet that we had in mind before that was done in black and white. We wanted a black and white campaign. The studio kind of agreed with us. And we had a final design that shows the camp with a large sort of evil-looking cloud overhanging the camp, filled with portent. Something that kind of reminded us of Curse of the Demon.
100,000 years ago, it found its way into our galaxy.
Film scheduled to open June 25th. The trailer that we liked and approved before the preview, before Sid and the studio began changing things. The trailer was cut and attached to the head end of every print of E.T., which was good for us. Not that it was necessarily our audience, but you certainly want your trailer to be seen by the largest audience in motion picture history, and it was, and mostly rejected by the largest audience in motion picture history.
John Carpenter's The Thing was a victim of bad timing, and some people say also bad marketing on the part of Universal. The Thing came out in the summer of 1982, and people will tell you that was Spielberg's summer. And along comes John Carpenter's The Thing, which in John Carpenter's trademark maverick, inimical fashion is no holds barred. It's balls to the wall. It is something you have never seen before. It is strong, and it's going to scare the shit out of you.
And it wasn't just a bomb. It wasn't just the fact that the movie didn't make money. The problem was that the critical reception of it was absolutely savage.
The reviews of the Carpenter version of The Thing were really mercilessly unkind in the way that, say, the reviews of Michael Powell's Peeping Tom had been. The critics were downright bullying it.
One reviewer called John Carpenter a pornographer of violence. Another said he was more suitable to directing traffic accidents and public floggings than films. Another critic said they went to see The Thing and they found it bereft and nihilistic and despairing. And the worst thing was the total absence of love.
One review I read said, oh, it's not something you can take your kids to. I mean, it's gory and all this. And I'm like, well, don't take the kid. What is this? What a stupid thing to say. Don't take your kids.
But I can just remember after a couple of them saying, you know what, you people, go fuck off. I mean, basically it was like, are you kidding me? Especially after the work that we put into it. It was a grind.
And Carpenter took it very, very hard. In fact, as we know, he has said that he never really recovered from the fact that this was the project where he really put himself out there and he got his head handed to him.
If his career was on blazing ascent like a rocket achieving escape velocity before The Thing, all of that was about to turn around.
Because The Thing was not particularly successful at the box office, Universal got cold feet on Carpenter's version of Stephen King's Firestarter, cut the budget, which caused Carpenter to walk from the project. Just the first of one of many ways of how The Thing would negatively impact his career going forward.
The good fortune is, over time, the film has become increasingly realized, I think, as a masterpiece of that genre.
People found it. People had heard about it, but they didn't go to a theater, and so they watched it on television or on video cassette.
You could probably not find one critic in a room of film critics today who would tell you that the thing wasn't a masterpiece.
And of course, these amazing visuals that still work so beautifully because they're actually organic and they were done on set and they were real special effects created by hand.
The Thing undoubtedly inspired thousands and thousands of people to become creature effects creators, technicians, makeup artists. It's sacred among makeup artists. It's spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. It's just beloved by these people.
You the only one who made it?
Not the only one.
As I was sitting with John reviewing the film, you know, and the work we had been doing for a couple of days, I really sensed the fact that he was very proud of what we had accomplished.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.